It is my great pleasure to introduce our next two presenters, both members of our archives team here at the center. Heather Sonntag joined us as a contract archivist in 2020 and later became part of our staff as an associate archivist. She began by processing our Ronald C. Hill collection, and she is now working on the Richard Steinheimer color slide collection. Heather hails from New Mexico and brings a great love of and passion for the landscapes of the American West, a perfect tie-in for her work on our photography here. Now, she has made Madison her home for more than 20 years, and she holds 2 master's degrees and a PhD from the University of Wisconsin. Adrienne Evans joined us in 2017 as our archives manager, and we later promoted her to our head archivist. 5 years ago, she was what the archives profession calls a lone arranger, the only archives staff member. She now has 6 people reporting to her. Together, they oversee our archive of more than 500,000 images currently in-house. That's more than twice what we had when Adrienne started. And as Haley already noted, that's poised to double in size again with the commitments we've already made. Adrienne holds a master's degree from the University of Wisconsin and worked for the Image Permanence Institute and History Colorado prior to joining us. She brings to us a deep love of historic photography and a great breadth of both experience and expertise for its care. We are so fortunate to have Heather and Adrienne on our staff. Won't you please give them a warm welcome?
Thanks, Scott. Give me 1 second while I get everything set up here. All right. I take it you guys are seeing my slide.
Looks good.
Cool. All right. Hi, as you all know by now, my name is Adrienne Evans, and I've been an archivist at the center since November 2017. And my main job at the center is to oversee the preservation, processing, and digitization of our permanent holdings. Today, I'll be speaking with you all about recent developments in our collections department and showing some highlights from our digitization efforts. Also, we're running late today and we have a lot to get through. We're currently working on 7 different collections at the same time. So if you'd like to see anything more from what's in this presentation, please reach out to me via email later on. And here we see abandoned boxcars surrounded by fall foliage in Palermo, Buenos Aires, Argentina on May 19th, 2005. And this image is part of our Henry Posner III collection. So just to get us started here, I love to show our really awesome trajectory in terms of collections growth since 2010 to now. And this past year, we've added approximately 63,000 images to the archive, bringing our total number of images here on site up to 556,000. This growth is primarily due to the arrival of material by Richard Steinheimer, Stan Kistler, Keith Bryant, and John Illman. One point to keep in mind here is the 2023 point, which is actually a 2023 plus category. It represents our current commitments to collections that will be transferred sometime in the future, as well as the material that's already here. And since the last time I gave updates, this number has increased from just under 860,000 to 960,000. You'll notice our y-axis has now increased to 1 million at its highest point, and I imagine we'll get there sooner than we think. Now, to manage all this growth, we have a large collections team, which is awesome. And I'd just like to introduce them briefly here. Archives Associate Gil Taylor recently became a full-time staff member. He's currently working on the Henry Posner III collection, and he's also been a huge help with rehousing the moving image film in the Mike Rooney collection. Gil is kind of swiftly becoming our resident moving image expert. Meanwhile, Archives Associate Natalie Kresick has been hard at work on the massive Jim Shaughnessy collection over the past few years. And before that, she single-handedly processed the Victor Hand collection, and she did much of that work when she was just an intern. Associate Archivist Heather Sonntag has just finished processing the Ronald C. Hill collection, and she is currently taking the lead on working with Richard Steinheimer's slides. As Scott mentioned, Heather will be joining me later on in the presentation to let you all know how that's been going. Elron Lawrence is our first acquisitions and marketing coordinator, and in this role, he's been working directly with collection donors to ensure the smooth transfer of their materials to our archive. And Elron was instrumental in helping getting the Steinheimer and Burman collection to the center last summer. And then next up is Erin Rose, our reference and digital projects archivist. And when she's not answering research and image requests, she has been processing the David Mainey and John C. Illman collections. And then finally, Abigail Guidry became a full-time staff member as our administrative and archives assistant this fall. And in this role, she's continuing her great work with the John Gruber collection. And in addition, she's also been providing us with some much needed assistance with development and administrative tasks around the office. So in addition to everybody's processing work, each of our collection staff members also contributes to our cataloging and preservation efforts, which have been big initiatives in the collections department this year alongside processing. And I'd like to share a little bit about that. And here is a capture of our new CMS, which I know I've been teasing for probably many years at this point. Last June, we picked out a CMS called Odyssey, which is powered by a company called History IT. And since then, we've been working with their team to get our cataloging standards set up in the system. We are currently in the final phases of ingesting all of our controlled vocabularies and making sure everything is optimal for the migration of our digital collections from Flickr to the new CMS. And we hope to have the system ready for public launch in early to mid 2023. And users can expect to find everything we've had available on Flickr, as well as new offerings from Gruber, Shaughnessy, Steinheimer, and more. We've got a lot more robust searching and browsing features, and all of us archives nerds are really excited to share that with you all. So stay tuned for updates. And this year, collection staff members have also been focused on advancing our preservation activities. This began with the launch of a cold storage program for the long-term preservation of our older and more at-risk materials. You can see on one side of the slide, freezer and cold storage packaging. We spent much of last winter and spring testing the deterioration levels of various likely candidates for cold storage, as well as figuring out the appropriate housing to protect them from the low temperatures in the freezers. So thus far, we rehoused and placed 6 boxes from the Furler collection in cold storage, and next we'll be adding a moving image film from the Mike Rooney collection to the freezer as well. And we're going to follow that up with additional testing to set more priorities for materials to go in the freezer. In addition, as I mentioned, Gil Taylor has been taking the lead on the preservation of our most recently acquired moving image materials. Last month, he actually received a traveling film care kit from Recollection, Wisconsin, which is a Wisconsin library archives consortium that helps provide resources to local history groups. This allowed Gil to recore and put new head and tail leader on the Mike Rooney films, and you can see some images from that on the slide as well. This is a totally new area for us, so we're really excited to be kind of branching out into this type of work as well, and hopefully Gil will want to kind of present what he's learned to the broader audience at some point. Anyway, now I can move on to some of the fruits of our digitization and processing labors, which is the fun part of the preservation, the train photography. The Jim Shaughnessy Collection has been a top processing priority over the past few years here. The whole collection contains approximately 90,000 images, and we've just been focusing on the film portion, which is about 60,000 images since the summer of 2020. These are arranged alphabetically by railroad, so we're tracking our progress by the letter. And right now, we're about to move on to the N series, which includes the New York Central, a frequently photographed railroad for Shaughnessy, as he spent a lot of time living in New York State. And thus far, we have digitized about 16,000 negatives from this collection. And here we see the main Central Railroad Company's Rockland Local at Wiscasset, Maine in August of 1960. And here it's passing by the Hesper and Luther Little, two trade route schooners that were actually abandoned in this area after their owner passed away. Fun fact, I think they remained here until about the 1990s, which is just kind of crazy to think about. Next in this kinetic image from Shaughnessy, children explore the Denver and Rio Grande Western steam locomotive 169, which here is on display in Alamosa, Colorado on September 1st, 1959. And then finally, this warm image, a friendly worker spares a smile for Shaughnessy as the photographer shoots Illinois Central steam locomotive number 2528 through a window in Paducah Yard in Kentucky on September 1st, 1957. Next up, another top priority has been the collection of the center's founder, John Gruber. This collection contains approximately 109,000 images that date from the 1940s to 2018. These negatives are arranged in chronological order, and while we started with the 40s, we're now all the way up to 1994, and thus far we've digitized 40,000 negatives from this collection. And we're actually anticipating completing the digitization of the negatives soon, and then we'll be working more with Gruber's color slides. And here we see a worker at the Mid-Continent Railway Museum in North Freedom, Wisconsin, adjusting a marker light on July 31st, 1993. And next, I asked Abigail Guidry for a heroic steam image from the 90s, and this is what she got me. This is Chicago and Northwestern number 1385 at the Mid-Continent Railway Museum in North Freedom on May 29th, 1993. And then finally, this looks like a timeless shot, even though it was just captured in the 90s. In this Gruber image, we see a track worker on the Green Bay and Western in Wisconsin Rapids, Wisconsin on January 17th, 1992. Moving on, we received a new batch of negatives from David Mainey at the end of September. This batch is composed of 3,035 millimeter negatives and corresponding digital slides, and dates from the 1980s. This material mostly documents Conrail operations. Erin Rose, who is processing the collection, estimates she's about 95% complete with digitizing this material. And here we see passing hoppers on a Conrail northbound freight train at mile 46 in Highland Falls, New York on September 25th, 1982. And here in this color shot from Mainey, I believe this came from a previous batch. We see Amtrak and Conrail locomotives, some of them with MTA lettering, mingling in the yard in Harmon, New York on January 28th, 1981. And finally, in this intimate worker portrait, this is the interior of a Conrail tower in Suffern, New York on August 24th, 1982. Next up is the John C. Illman collection. We began processing this material last June. It's comprised of approximately 3,000 negatives with corresponding contact prints that date from the 1940s to the 1990s. Illman was born in the Pacific Northwest and spent much of his adult life in California. So the Southern Pacific, Santa Fe, and California's short lines and logging operations are certainly well represented in this material. However, Illman's photography also depicts rail operations from throughout the United States as he traveled frequently for work. Here we see Great Northern Railway locomotive number 504 climbing Marias Pass in Montana on June 5th, 1950. Then with this nice plume of steam here, this is Southern Pacific Railroad locomotive number 4443, leading the excursion train, the Fresno Flyer, at Los Banos, California on March 25th, 1957. And then next we have Southern Pacific Railroad passenger train number 102 at Oakland Pier in Oakland, California on January 2nd, 1949. Moving on, we also had new additions to the Ronald C. Hill collection since the last time I talked to you guys. Last June, we received a batch of 2,500 prints and negatives from Ron, and Heather quickly went to work to process and add the new arrivals to the 23,000 slides already in the collection. The negatives and prints date from 1965 to 2011 and depict railroad scenes from the United States with an emphasis on the American West. They also document Hill's travels to South Africa. And currently all of the prints and negatives have been cataloged, rehoused, and selectively digitized. And Heather is just in the process of finishing up the finding aid for these materials. And here we are looking westward toward the Rocky Mountain Piedmont near Greenland, Colorado, as a herd of bison graze railside and a Union Pacific coal train heads southbound in the background. And Hill shot this image in on June 7th of 2008. Next, we see Canadian Pacific Railway freight train number 405 as it runs along a very glassy Summit Lake in British Columbia. This creates kind of a perfectly placid black and white reflection of the train, which is really pleasing to look at. And this was shot on August 15th, 1981. And then next from Hill's International Travels, this is a South African Railway mixed train led by a Class 24 locomotive crossing the Caymans River Railway Bridge in Western Cape, South Africa on June 10th, 1985. And then next we have a little break in the black and white with some color images from the Henry Posner III collection. Since early last year, we've been hard at work processing these materials, which are on long-term from Henry to the center. Posner serves as the chairman of the Railroad Development Corporation, which invests in and helps run railroads across the world. And this work has taken him around the globe, and his collection wonderfully depicts railroad scenes in a variety of contexts and locations. For instance, Gil Taylor, who's working on the collection right now, has most recently digitized scenes from Finland, France, Georgia, Germany, and Great Britain. Gil is currently working on Posner's Guatemala slides, which is one of the largest series in the collection. And we actually see an image from that series here. These are workers clearing asphalt from the tracks as they rehab the lines in Guatemala City on September 3rd in 1998. And then next up, we're in Cuba. Here we see a worker in a hard hat walking along the tracks as a Brill electric rail car crosses a bridge somewhere along the Hershey Electric Railway outside of Havana, Cuba on March 31st, 1981. And then finally from Posner, a kind of surreal and image that just really struck me. This is a scene from the Harbin Children's Railway, which is a training school for young people interested in future railroad employment. Posner captured this image in Harbin, China in August of 1981. Now, last but not least, I'd like to spend a little time updating you all about the status of the Richard Steinheimer and Shirley Burman Steinheimer collection. Last June, a team that included myself, Elron Lawrence, and Ken Rehor gathered at the Sacramento home of Shirley Burman Steinheimer, Richard Steinheimer's widow, to prepare the Steinheimer and Burman collection for its transportation to the center's headquarters in Madison, Wisconsin. We spent a week with Shirley sorting, packing, and most importantly, reminiscing about Steinheimer, his photography, and legacy. I really treasure the time we got to spend together. It's not often that archivists actually get to visit the dark rooms where the collections in their care were created, so that was incredibly special. By the end of the week, we came away with 30,000 color slides, a large selection of Steinheimer's original photographic prints and black and white negatives, and many corresponding digital scans. And if you're interested in hearing more about this week, you should check out my Out of the Archives column from issue 70 of Railroad Heritage, which came out this fall. And now, since the arrival of the collection in June, Heather and I have decided to divide and conquer the processing work. She's taken on the processing of the slides, while I have been working on the prints and negatives. Over the past few months, I've been spending my Tuesdays at the archive with the collection, and I've just completed my initial survey of the materials. We have approximately 4,200 prints and 2,700 negatives, and most images date from the early to mid phases of Steinheimer's career. Many are classic images. I think a lot of you would likely recognize from publications like Steinheimer's Electric Way Across the Mountains, Growing Up with Trains 1 and 2, and Backwoods Railroads of the West. I also want to say they're just beautiful prints, masterfully created by Steinheimer himself, who was an extremely talented darkroom printer. My next steps with the collection will be finalizing the arrangement of the materials and then rehousing them. The materials are currently arranged by subject and/or location, and I will be preserving most of these categories as I move forward with processing and digitization. And I'd like to show you a few highlights from the collection today. And I want to start out with this curiosity that Shirley shared with me earlier on in the month. These scans were made from a roll of film that appears to be shot through with little lightning bolts. In fact, Steinheimer himself reported that the whole roll of film here was ruined by lightning. When Shirley first showed me the center image on the slide here, I was a little incredulous. And what struck me the most is that I had just never seen anything like this before. So I went and looked up this phenomenon, and surely enough, the marks you're seeing are the physical manifestations of static electricity sparking on the film. This is a rare occurrence, but static can build up on the parts of the film or camera equipment while the photographer winds the film. And if it builds up enough, it arcs the closest neutral or oppositely charged material. This is most likely to occur in cool and dry conditions where the humidity is below 40%, or in really electrically charged up spaces, like the air around an area where lightning is about to strike. So putting this all together, it makes perfect sense that this would happen to Steinheimer's film, as he shot this roll in the Mojave Desert during monsoon season, possibly while playing chicken with a lightning storm. But was Steinheimer actually that close to getting struck? Being an archivist, I decided to check the collection for additional photographic evidence. So I reviewed Steinheimer's prints and negatives to see if I could match up this roll with some of Steinheimer's images of electrical storms taken in the same relative area around the Mojave Desert and during the same time period between 1976 and 1977. And I don't know if I found any smoking guns or had any shocking revelations, but I did uncover some pretty great photography. So I'd like to share some of that with you now. First, I found this image shot by Stein in 1976 during an electrical storm at Goff's Butte in the southeastern corner of the Mojave Desert. Here you can see the Santa Fe's tracks in the foreground, and this is right along Route 66. A few years later, Steinheimer would take this route with Shirley during one of their first trips together as a couple, although I think they may have started this trip a little further south at Amboy. Shirley wrote a really wonderful article about this trip too for the website California Desert Art, which I highly recommend everybody checks out. So after considering this image as a potential culprit for our electrified film, I realized it was probably unlikely, as Goff's Butte is about 57 miles north of Amboy. So next I considered this striking image. This was shot by Stein between 1976 and 1977, again along the Santa Fe and the Mojave. And this is probably one of Stein's most famous lightning images, at least of his black and white work. It was published in Steinheimer's Growing Up with Trains. And I think what makes this image really special is the passage accompanying the image in the book, where Stein expressed his love of the Mojave, writing, "Let me take 100 years to know this desert." Despite that, I've come to realize that this storm is probably not the same one that sparked up Stein's film. This was taken near Ludlow, an outpost town in the southeastern Mojave, which is about 46 miles away from Amboy. Then I came across this series of images, which I've somewhat clumsily animated here for you to get the full effect of a lightning storm shoot. I can't prove it, but I think this storm might be the most likely culprit for Stein's shocked film. Steinheimer shot this roll at milepost 656.2, a mile from what the Santa Fe called Bolo Station, which is located in the Amboy area of the Mojave. And here we see the lightning strike pretty close to Steinheimer, which I think only adds to the mythos about him being a bit of a daredevil. However, when I spoke to Shirley about this, she did offer a different perspective and recalled shooting a lightning storm with Steinheimer on the Great Salt Lake. And she described him as a little more cautious than what I would have thought. She said during the shoot, he would count beats between thunderclaps and lightning strikes to ensure they were both safe from the storm. Then again, Shirley admitted, there was really no telling to what kind of hijinks Steinheimer was up to when he was shooting on his own, so the caution may have just been for her benefit. So Stein spent a great deal of time out in the Mojave from 1976 to 1978. He lived nearby in 29 Palms then for work, and he wasn't just out there to capture the dramatic weather. He was also there for the Santa Fe and Southern Pacific, of course. And I'm not completely heartless, so I thought I would share a little bit of Steinheimer's train photography with you today as well. Here we see a Santa Fe freight train number 408 drumming up the 1.5% westbound grade at Ibis, California, against the backdrop of the Dead Mountains. And many of you will probably recognize this image from Steinheimer's excellent photo essay, Mojave Crossing, which appeared in Trains magazine in August of 1977. And then here we see a shot of the town of Mojave itself at late twilight. Santa Fe freight switches as the lights of nearby Reno's Cafe and other businesses go on at dusk. And Steinheimer shot this image in the summer of 1976. And here's a personal favorite. We see a Southern Pacific tunnel motor passing through the town of Mojave on a snowy day in 1976. And you can see the depot there just beyond the passing train. You can also see an SD-39 at the right, which would handle the thrice weekly trips of the Lone Pine local freight. And I believe this ran with Steinheimer's photo essay on the Tehachapies, which appeared in Trains magazine in January of 1977. The next up is this kind of artistic capture, which shows Amtrak number 3, which should have been gone from the Needles district before daylight. But this particular train was running late due to storms out in the Midwest. And this was shot in January of 1977. And then finally, to close up my portion of the presentation here is kind of an iconic Western scene, I feel like, with this really picturesque historic cemetery on the outskirts of the town of Amboy. And in the background, we see an eastbound Santa Fe freight, and Steinheimer captured this image in 1976 as well. And that's pretty much it for my part of the presentation. I think Heather will be up next.
Thanks, Adrienne. Can you all hear me? Okay.
Yes.
And can you see my cursor when I move it around?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks for that feedback.
Yeah.
As Adrienne mentioned, well, I'm Heather Sonntag, the Associate Archivist at the Center. And as Adrienne mentioned, I'm processing the Burman Steinheimer, the Steinheimer Burman color slide collection. I want to see myself here. Hang on. And today I'll give a brief update on how that is going. I'll then present what I'm calling Orwood vignettes to show highlights from the early digitization project. In June, we received 74 Logan boxes containing roughly 30,000 slides. As you can see here, they are shelved at the center's Railroad Heritage Visual Archive and are arranged physically based on Stein's original labeling system, which is alphabetical from A to Z, AA to AZ, and so on, ending with box CD. Archival practice of new collections requires a preliminary processing plan. And what that means is that archivists take stock of newly accessioned materials, considering quantity, original housing condition, and metadata, the metadata being creation dates, image subject, geographical locations, and any technical information. In this, we make inventories that help us formulate the best approach for the collection that will ensure the long-term preservation and access. And as you all well know, our archive makes collections accessible through online galleries, publications, social media, and filling image and research requests, as well as presentations like this one. So digitization is prioritized in this plan. Making the inventory was quite easy for me because I could refer to digital images of every Logan box that were taken by Shirley and Ken when they were helping Adrienne and Ronald prepare the transfer last June. They imaged exteriors and interiors of every box, which shows Stein's handwritten notes. Exterior shots consist of the top lids and front-facing sides, and interiors picture the arrangement of slides as well as corresponding content sheets that describe subject, location, and dates, as the slides are found in the 30 storage sections that divide up the box. So the top image here is showing some of these exteriors and interiors for boxes A through G that I used as reference images, and the bottom are my electronic folders grouping Logan boxes by letter. And quickly, here you see my screenshot of a screenshot of my laptop workplace for the data sheet of Logan box AK pictured on the right that I referred to for transcribing Stein's notes into the spreadsheet, which is on the left. The spreadsheet serves as our inventory and has a row for every Logan box section from 1 through 30 and columns to record verbatimly Stein's contents, date, and location. Now here, I've been able to summarize some of the preliminary details from this inventory, and the date range is roughly 1947 to 1999, with the bulk dates of the 70s to the 90s. And geographical locations are no surprise that it's dominantly United States, though there are a few that are relating to Canada, England, France, and Mexico. And the most prominent state is California, again, no surprise. And bordering states, Arizona, Nevada, Oregon, some of Utah and New Mexico are the next dominant series, with the other states listed smatterings here and there. Now, while I was compiling the inventory spreadsheet, which took me about 8 to 10 weeks, I also added to a growing list on a Word document of notable and special subjects that I'd review with Adrienne as to where I might start digitizing. And I have to admit that given the large size and importance of this collection, I was at a true loss for where to begin. Fortunately, in September, Inga, our development director, made a request for new images that pictured rail workers hanging orders that she could use in Railroad Heritage for the Center's Legacy Society, which is based on the Form 19 train order. Inga's request provided the perfect place for me to start diving in. And that place was Logan box AK, with a few sections labeled orders that all relate to Orwood, California. So now I'll begin to highlight some of these vignettes that document workers on the Santa Fe line of the Stockton subdivision. The first section I looked at, AK7, follows operator Elvin Hicks on May 7th, 1985. Stein profiled Hicks in a sequence of images in the train order office, showing him preparing orders for the Santa Fe on a manual typewriter. And as Stein noted, the sequence has nice close-ups. I'm not sure if Hicks was into rockabilly, but I particularly like his greased up pompadour that is pressed down by the headphones in that upper right-hand image. And what I've immediately enjoyed tremendously about processing this collection and learned from creating the inventory is that Stein's content sheets included information beyond the usual that we look for in metadata. His notes are often very expressive with certain punctuation and sometimes serve as journal entries on the smallest but no less insignificant details. Notes for AK-7, for instance, relay that Hicks has worked at the Orwood Tower for 25 years, since June of 1960. There are several shots of Hicks outside hanging orders, but I really love this one for the action and blur of the caboose and rail worker grabbing the order with Hicks standing by. Another profile I looked at right away for Inga was of relief operator Pete Basilio, an AK-25, which Stein made on September 10th, later that same day, and which he noted as very good and moody shots. The silhouette of Basilio at dusk hanging the order hoop is one that Stein duplicated a few times, showing that it was a zinger. And I love the reflected shine, not just on the tracks, a signature of Stein's, but also on Basilio's gold wristwatch. Again, here from the few notes that Stein has made, we see that Basilio has 8 years seniority at the Stockton Tower, and he must have told Stein that it was, quote, spooky at Orwood, end quote, at night, for those words to be written in quotation marks. This is a great portrait of Basilio with his coat and that amazing Santa Fe patch in the early autumn light. And I must admit that I was rather confused by all the water. I mean, where is this place? Where are the railroad tracks? And is this the same station that Elvin Hicks was working in? One of the joys of being a photo archivist is the armchair travel that takes me to places I've never been to, but get to learn about. And so I had to ask, where in the heck is Orwood? And thanks to Ronald, I learned that this area, located west of Stockton, is called the Sacramento San Joaquin River Delta, which is an expansive inland river delta and estuary in Northern California. The red circle shows the blue horizontal line running east-west in the middle, which is the Woodward Canal. And in this aerial, we see Orwood at the west end of the canal. And zooming in a bit more, the same aerial shows us the raised east-west single track on the canal, which is intersected by the old river. Dead center, right here, we see the single leaf bascule drawbridge, also called the Old River Railroad Bridge, built in 1928. And just east of it, right here, the train order station or tower with its distinctive pitched roof. And Stein's image shows us a track on bridge level vantage point taken in January of 1985, which is including a waxing gibbous moon overhead. And I pay attention to the moons and the sunsets and the lightning and the fog and the ice and the snow and the wind, all written in these notes. I know they were important to Stein, so I will also be paying attention to them as I move through the collection. Here's another one of a midwinter sun in this dramatic silhouette of the bascule's truss. And finally, a perspective of the bridge and tower down the line later that year in September, in the golden hour as an Amtrak passenger train glides by. Now, according to my Logan box inventory, Stein took up to 6 trips in Orwood between January 1985 and April 1986. On these trips, he profiled the routines of 4 tower operators, all whom Stein interchangeably referred to in his notes as operators, clerks, and levermen, the latter term used for their specialized training to open the drawbridge. And these men were Bob Pretty, seen on the right, tying an order to the hoop, and on the left, leaving his shift at 3:45 p.m. on the same day. Elvin Hicks, arriving to work to relieve Bob at 3:45 on the left there, and on the right on May 7th, 1985, standing on a platform by a hoop that he's tied an order to. Pete Basilio, seen here looking west after he's opened a bridge for a boat, and by the looks of his right hand or left hand waving, he must be acknowledging the boat driver as it passes under the bridge. And then finally, Doug Voyer in AK-23, taken on July 29th, 1985. Here, Voyer is 29 years old, and Stein notes that he was hired on January 29th, 1977 to work the Stockton Tower, and he would have been 21 years old at that time. Now, Stein being Stein, he also took advantage on this day in July to climb the truss to get a few elevated views. And so here we see the westbound Santa Fe Hotshot 99 being pulled by engine 5984 after 5:30 for orders, seen in the hoops, the upper hoop here, the lower hoop down here, approaching Voyer, who is just outside the tower, and Stein's shadow seen below on the track. Seconds later, and what is probably the conductor's hand barely visible, now grabbing the order from the hoop, and Stein's shadow on the nose of the engine, the canal waters flanking the train on both sides. And while Stein was up there, he caught this photo of the Sheriff Boat Patrol passing under the bridge. And I just don't know if he was riding the bascule drawbridge as it goes up or not. But it seemed like another super Stein shot to me. Now I'll finish this vignette of the Orwood Tower and operators with a shot by Shirley that I found in AK3. And I'm showing it imaged in the mount to demonstrate that extra layer of handwritten notes that we are transcribing. Shirley and I have met a couple times over Zoom in the last month to discuss Orwood. And she's told me that because of my digging around in Dick's Orwood shots, she's rediscovered a lot of Orwood photography in her own boxes, which she took outside and inside the order office, like this one of the Santa Fe 2738 westbound, which she shot through the window as it approached in January. Now, the last profile I will share of Orwood covers something that both Dick and Shirley happened upon trackside, just west of the drawbridge. Focusing on Scott Sayre, this profile is equally intimate in Stein's documentation, but with an added personal connection. And when I told Adrienne I found this set of slides of some guy doing watercolors at Orwood by the tracks and Shirley and Stein drawing, she told me that she told me I had to talk to Shirley because that very subject had come up in some of their conversations. So I set a date to finally meet with Shirley by FaceTime and Zoom. It was a lot of fun. And I hope I get this next story right because I know that you're listening, Shirley. So I learned that this guy was Scott Sayre, who Shirley and Dick met on their very first date, April 23rd, 1983. Sayre was a brakeman at that time for Santa Fe, and when seeing Shirley in San Francisco's China Basin, he invited her to join them in the switcher cab. Seeing a group of people crowding around a very tall man with a camera down the street, Sayre asked Shirley who it was. When hearing it was Richard Steinheimer, they got Dick aboard for a ride, and all conversation shifted from Shirley to her boyfriend. It was at that meeting, however, that Stein may have altered the fates of Sayre, who at the time was 29 years old, and he's in this photo on the left. Sayre had told Dick that he wanted to be an artist, and Dick replied, "Follow your dreams." 2 years later, in January 1985, and only a few months after Stein and Shirley were married, they ran into a man painting a large watercolor on an easel along the tracks at Orwood. That man was Scott Sayre, the former Atkinson, Topeka, Santa Fe trainman, who had followed his dreams and transitioned to becoming an artist. All these profiles of railroaders at Orwood exemplify Stein's visual narrative approach that was inspired by the photography course he took with Joe Rosenthal in 1949 at City College in San Francisco. And this one in particular of Sayre stands out to me for Stein's documentary humanist style, capturing the trainman doing watercolors with his nonplussed dog and painter's palette beside the westbound 199 hotshot. And Shirley was able to catch a photo of Dick saying hi to the dog here. And also of Scott Sayre adding some details to the sighting track. Now, sometime after meeting Sayre at Orwood in January that day, a surprise came to Shirley and Dick in the mail. The very completed watercolor Sayre was painting at Orwood, in which he included the newlywed couple of Stan and Shirley central to the railroad scene. Now, from an archival perspective, my deep dive into this larger Orwood series has also helped clear up a mystery image that for such a long time has been designated as having been taken in Norden. I found a sequence of several slides of Dick and Shirley wearing these white hard hats in AK-6 and had to ask Shirley, who was the photographer? Well, it turns out that the photographer was Scott Sayre, and Shirley helped me confirm that indeed the track car that they're sitting in was at Orwood. And this is the photo she sent me to confirm that. At some point after shooting the operators in the tower, they pulled their hard hats out and had that photo shoot. And there's probably over a dozen in the AK-6 box, and then some in Shirley's files in California. So with that, I will conclude my program with this very endearing image of Dick and Shirley in the center of the frame. Thank you very much.